I give because I recognize the power to solve my community's problems.
Because I want to be transformed.
Every time I think I can't give enough, I always find a reason to not only give, but to be inspired by that giving.
Collective giving helps me give far more generously than I can by myself.
Collective giving helps us to practice our values of democratic decision-making.
It helps to unite communities and strengthen their impact.
We're collaborating together to empower the next generation.
To reimagine philanthropy.
The one thing that we know for sure in the collective giving movement is that there is power in community. We Give Summit is a space where we come together to listen, to learn, and to have discussions that will lead to action.
We all are philanthropists, and you don't have to be a millionaire to be a philanthropist.
So when we're giving these grants, when we're able to elevate our community in groups and organizations, we're now creating a playing field that we get to be around each other. We get to see everybody succeed.
Our commitment to solidarity means building and fostering meaningful relationships with our grantee partners and being accountable.
Social change happens in the communities. It starts at the neighborhood level. It starts in relationships we have with each other and how we show up for each other.
We Give Summit matters now more than ever. We need each other. We need collective action. We need hope. And at We Give Summit, you'll find all of that and some more. Let's show the world that when we give together, we thrive together.
Welcome everyone to We Give Summit 2025. I am so excited to kick off our 5th annual gathering, a global celebration of collective giving, and to see all of you joining from all over the world. We have participants tuning in from more than 30 countries this year, and I really feel the energy across time zones, languages, and lived experiences. My name is Sara Lumelin. I am the CEO of Philanthropy Together. We're a global initiative working to catalyze the collective giving movement, from giving circles to women's funds, collaborative funds, mutual aid groups, and everything in between. Whether you are here as a long-time circle member, a curious newcomer, a funder, a nonprofit leader, advisor, or organizer, there is a space here for you at We Give Summit. Our theme this year is Thrive Together. And I want to pause on that for a second, because thriving doesn't just mean surviving, and it doesn't mean pretending things are okay when they're not. To thrive means to grow roots and stretch toward the light, even in hard soil. It means finding joy, community, and courage in the midst of challenge. It means building systems of care, generosity, and accountability that allow all of us to flourish, especially those historically excluded from traditional philanthropy. Thriving isn't a solo journey. It's something that we do together. And that is what collective giving has always been about. Across the movement, we see people showing up with more than just dollars. They show up by volunteering, by sharing expertise, with stories, with connections, with vision. These 5 T's, time, talent, treasure, testimony, and ties, are the roots of collective giving. And this summit will help us, all of us, grow them. So we have an incredible lineup over the next 3 days, including Dimple Abichandani and Hallie Lee as this year's keynotes, sharing insights from the powerful new books. We have panels and workshops led by more than a dozen thought leaders and change makers. We will also have opportunities for you to engage with one another during our collective conversations. These are space for you to come and meet others in this movement. And on day 3, for the very first time, we will be offering concurrent trainings for nonprofits, philanthropic advisors, community foundations, and both new and seasoned Giving Circle members. Here, we will share practical tips and tools to deepen your impact right away. And we know this is a challenging time around the world. There is a lot of pain, conflict, and polarization. And at the same time, we have you. So many people are reaching for connection, justice, and peace. We really hope this summit reminds you that collective giving isn't just a tool. It's a practice, a community, a movement that is grounded in hope. We invite you to show up with compassion, with curiosity. We have a whole session on this later today, and with courage, to listen deeply, to speak truth, and to see each other's full humanity. Our community guidelines will be shared in the chat, and we ask that we all honor the spirit of principled, respectful engagement. Before I begin, I want to extend deep gratitude to our We Give Summit Steering Committee for their, tireless work during these past months, to every speaker for sharing their vision and their truth, and especially to the Philanthropy Together team, Ilyasa, Isis, Tai, Maya, Rebecca, and Deja, for making this magic possible. Thank you, all of you, for being here, and thank you for bringing your voice, your heart, and your hope. And let's dig in, let's build together, and most of all, let's thrive together. With that, I am so incredibly excited to welcome Isis Krause, our amazing Chief Strategy Officer, and Dimple Abichandani to kick us off from transaction to transformation, shifting how we fund to thrive together. Welcome, Dimple and Isis.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Dimple, we are so excited to be here. I got my copy in the mail maybe 10 days ago in preparation for this panel, and it's so thrilling to see everything you've written in this book. So thank you so much for coming. For those of you here who don't know Dimple, you are in for a real treat. Dimple has been a leader in this sector for more than 20 years. She was the executive director at the General Service Foundation for an extended period. She was the founding director at the Rise Together Fund, which we'll talk a little bit about in a second. She also led the Center for Social Justice at UC Berkeley and the School of Law. And all of those experiences, she's been questioning philanthropy and our practices and how we do things. And so I'm really excited for this keynote today to be able to dig in deeper with you, Dimple, and hear more about your thoughts and how that ties to collective giving. So to start, I would love to just say that you are one of us. So many times keynote speakers, we have to find the angle of how collective and collaborative giving might weave into their history and their past. But with you, you literally were the founding director of a collaborative fund. You understand collaborative philanthropy so intimately and deeply. And so I'm just especially excited to hear from you around sort of how that has followed you through your history in this sector and what made you decide that this book really needs to exist.
Well, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for that introduction. And yes, I do feel like I'm one of you. I feel very happy to be part of this community because for so much of my time in philanthropy, I was looking for fellow travelers who had as their starting point this kind of question around what can we do together, and so yes, for me, kind of when I think about all of my work in philanthropy, the through line has always been a deep understanding that impact comes from collaboration. And so I had the gift of starting a collaborative fund and building it. But also when I went on to run a private foundation for 7 years, I think one of my real contributions there was that I moved our grant making strategy to really center what we could accomplish through collaborative funds. And so we did 25% of our grant making through 14 collaborative funds. And that was a mix of funds that had existed for a long time and then ones that we helped build, like the Pop Culture Collaborative. And so, yes, I feel like that has been a through line. I will say, I didn't fully appreciate the significance and really how I didn't appreciate the significance of collaborative funding and the ways in which it really is building something new until I wrote this book. So both it has been something I have naturally been drawn to, and now I have a different understanding of the power of it. So why don't I say a little bit about what brought me to the book? Yeah. So when I left the General Service Foundation towards the end of 2022, I felt like I was really starting to see it was the end of a cycle where, as a sector, we had made these sort of leaps forward towards really funding in new ways, whether that was the trust-based practices that many of us had started to use kind of post-pandemic. It was the commitment to racial justice that so many organizations had made. I had seen many foundations for the first time spend in new ways, like really going beyond the kind of 5% model. By the end of 2022, I was seeing all of that kind of starting to roll back. And now sitting here in 2025, I think all of us can see that.
Definitely talk about that in a bit.
Yeah, and it felt very familiar. It felt like this story that I had seen unfold many times, right? Of in philanthropy, we take one step forward and then we take one or two steps back. And it left me with this question of, what does it look like to have durable change in terms of how we resource work? Like, what will it take? And that was kind of the question. Put another way, the reason that those steps back are so heartbreaking is because so many of us understand the stakes in the times that we live in. So put another way, the question that kept kind of arising for me is, what is a philanthropy that meets this moment, that meets our times? And not this moment as in one election, but this moment as in a time where we are all alive, where there are these multiple intersecting crises, all of which speak to power imbalances and all of which require resources, right? So what is it that needs to shift so that we can actually resource this moment? So that was the question that this book sort of set out to answer. And yeah, I will turn it back to you.
I love that. I feel like everybody who's joining us today and who has joined us for the last 5 We Give Summits, that question of how do we meet this moment in whatever moment is so present for so many. And so thank you for writing this book that really brings a lot to the surface. Before we look ahead and actually dive into some of the new era practices that you mentioned in your book, I'd love to understand, you did some really interesting digging into Carnegie and some of the roots of historical philanthropy and how the sector started. And so I want to stay with the past for just a moment and hear from you a little bit about what you want readers and the folks here today at We Give Summit to really understand about sort of looking back at history in terms of philanthropy before we start moving forward? What was some of the pieces that you uncovered there?
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the surprising gifts of writing this book, is that I was looking at the question of where do we go from here so that we can meet the future. And where I found the most compelling answers was actually by looking at the past, by looking at how is it that we came to be here in this sector? How is it that we came to have the norms and practices that we have? So my kind of journey to the past was not intentional, in the sense that I didn't start there, but actually I was months into working on the book, and I was on this family vacation in Pacific Grove, California, and I had taken a few hours away from my family to go work on the book, and I was at the public library, say that again. And I was wrapping up my work, putting away my laptop, and I looked up, and on the wall in front of me was this framed portrait of Andrew Carnegie. And at the time, I just thought it was sort of funny. I was like, oh, did he write about philanthropy? I think he wrote about philanthropy. And here I am trying to write about philanthropy. And so I really
his name.
Yes. And I didn't think much more of it. I just, like, as I was leaving, I took this really silly selfie of myself next to the portrait. But then later, as I was going through my phone, I looked at that selfie and I thought, what is that portrait doing here in 2024? And it started me on this kind of journey, because I actually had never read anything that Andrew Carnegie had written. And I think that's probably true of many of us who've been doing this work. So I went down all these rabbit holes, but I'll share the ones that I think are most relevant. Andrew Carnegie is known as the father of modern philanthropy. For those who don't know, he was an industrialist, owned these steel mills, really built the US steel industry. And then when in his time, he was really like kind of richest man alive of his era, and went on to write these two essays that we know today as the Gospel of Wealth, in which he describes philanthropy. And I think something interesting to know is that, that period that he lived in is actually really similar to our period today. So it was this time of rapid economic change. It was a time where a few wealthy people kind of had all the resources and most people were struggling to survive. The difference being that that was really new in Carnegie's time, right? So we know that era today as the Gilded Era, and that term was coined by Mark Twain. And gilded, kind of, he called it that because to gild means to cover over something with a thin sheath of gold. And so he called it the Gilded Era to refer to how things that were kind of hollow or corrupt underneath were being kind of covered over with gold. So what I found really interesting in going back and really entering what felt like a conversation across time with Andrew Carnegie, what I found interesting is that he starts his Gospel of Wealth by describing the times and describing just off the bat the hardship that most people were experiencing because a few people had all the wealth. And he describes that. So it's like he knows, but then he goes on to say, that's not going to change. And in fact, this new system, which we now, all can readily identify as a form of extreme capitalism, he says, this new system is the law of civilizations. And he goes on to describe in ways that today, for those of us reading it, it sounds almost like a deal. It's like an offer or a deal from the ultra wealthy. He goes on to describe, I know this is hard, but don't worry, we are going to take care of you through this thing that we call philanthropy. And you know what? We actually make better decisions than you wouldn't have made if you had just gotten these, quote, small sums of money as wages, right? Because we're the ultra wealthy, we make the best decisions. So it's really an extraordinary thing, I think, when you read it from today, because what's actually unfolding on the pages is a justification of in kind of structural inequality with a promise of generosity later. So like, don't worry that the system doesn't work for most, because we're going to be generous. We're going to take care of you. And what's really significant is that it doesn't read fully like a historical document, because so many of the norms and ideas are ones that then got kind of absorbed into so much of institutional philanthropy. So in my book, I basically describe kind of what he puts into motion as a gilded philanthropy. In other words, a philanthropy that kind of is covering over systems that don't work with like a thin sheath of gold, trying to make them look like they're okay. And I think the most important thing I took away from that kind of journey and conversation with Andrew Carnegie is that he was really crystal clear about the purpose of philanthropy, right? And for him, the purpose was to do a little bit of good, but not to change in any way the systems that shape who has power and wealth. That he's very explicit about that. And so that's why I think that term gilded philanthropy is really appropriate. And the thing is that we see that philanthropy today when we look at foundations that are giving 5% of their resources away for change and then investing 95% in the status quo, right? So like that impulse towards preservation of systems, that comes from Andrew Carnegie, and it's been passed on to us. We see it today in organizations that kind of keep decision-making in the hands of only those with the most power and wealth, right? That's like a perfect Carnegie lineage, right? That says like billionaires know best. And that's part of why I think what this community is doing in terms of democratizing who makes decisions, that's why it's so revolutionary and why it would fall under what I call new era philanthropy. So I'll just say that, you know, for me, this journey through history helped me understand that at the core, what we need to shift is our purpose, right? That the new era is about a purpose of transforming these systems. And then the book basically looks at 10 practices of philanthropy through the lens of, if we have this new purpose, how do we practice our philanthropy?
Thank you for sharing all of that. I think it can be so easy to get so frustrated and impatient by everything that's happening in our current moment over the last several decades. And so going back even 100 years just reminds us that we all have been here before, and we know what can we learn from the past. When we were naming philanthropy together, we got a lot of feedback early on of like, why would you put philanthropy in the name? There's such you know, negative stigma around that term of philanthropy, everything you're just raising with what Carnegie shared. And I think, you know, what really felt so true to us at Philanthropy Together was that the real root of the word, love of humanity, that is what philanthropy can be and should be. That purpose that you're talking about can be so different. It really comes down to how we actually practice it, how we put that in motion, the intentions behind it, the outcomes that come from that. So thank you for sharing all of that history. I'd love to dive into some of those actual new era practices that you mentioned, and I'd love to actually hear from everybody in the chat. What are the practices that you think define the new era of philanthropy? I know the book just came out, so maybe you haven't read it yet. And so we just would love to open it up for a moment and see what are some of the practices that you think we need for the new era of philanthropy, or that you think define the new era of philanthropy. I'll give everyone a second to roll those in and I'll read a few of them out. Funding systems change, not charity. Yes, Adriana, love that one. A mindset of abundance. Social impact is an important space to pay attention to. Mutuality and mutual aid. Love that, Hilda. Power shifting, collaboration, trust, participatory grant making, trust-based philanthropy. So many of these themes are the ones that I know, having been able to already read the book, Dimple, are ones that you mention. And your book really paints this super powerful vision for a philanthropy that's rooted in solidarity and trust and systemic change. So many of the pieces that folks are sharing in the chat right now. And one chapter that I know everyone here, especially on the call, will be so thrilled to read is your very last chapter, All Together Now. And you end with this beautiful reflection on what happens when we come together to give and come together for collective impact. So I would love for you, if you can, to read a short excerpt from that chapter to set up this next section of our chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will share, as I've started to, the book's only been out for a couple of weeks, but as I've started to share it, I sometimes am asked, okay, if I can't do all 10 practices, which one's the most important? And they're all important, but of the 10, I always point people towards, it's the last chapter because it's the most important. It's the one that holds, I think, the most potential and possibility to really sort of take us towards a transformative philanthropy. So these are just a couple of paragraphs setting up this chapter that's titled All Together Now, that is about what happens if we bring a collective approach to our philanthropy. What if instead of today's individualized approach to philanthropy, foundations saw their work as collective? What if our model was an ecosystem of shared purpose, vision, strategy, and an ability to be in deep relationship with one another, where the collective nature of our work could be an expression of mutual accountability? Philanthropy, acting collectively, can not only fill resource gaps, but also address the deeper structural challenges of how power is organized in our society. This chapter invites us to practice a collective approach to resourcing a more just and sustainable future. From there, the door opens to everything collaboration offers, what we learn together, how we're changed in community, the sharpness of our strategies, our ability to make meaning, and a more powerful path to wide-scale change.
Thank you for sharing that. And for everybody who's joining us today as part of We Give Summit, I know all of you are already practicing collective giving, collaborative giving in so many different ways, or you're a supporter of it. And obviously Dimple's book speaks a lot to foundations, but I think this is a message for anybody, for any individual donor, for any philanthropic advisor, for any foundation head, really for anyone who wants to make change in their community. And, I feel so proud that this rock, this boulder that we've all been pushing uphill for so long, we feel like we've been preaching this from the rooftops for years and decades and decades. And so to see it as your closing chapter in a book called The New Era of Philanthropy is just, it really brought tears to my eyes, Dimple. So thank you for that. And thank you to everybody who's part of this incredible community and movement pushing philanthropy forward. Maybe you could share a little bit more about, again, why you closed with that chapter, why you think it's so important, and what some of those themes are.
Yeah. Really, part of how I tried to understand the new era was to look out and see where in the sector are we reimagining the purpose of philanthropy, and where is it that we are doing things like shifting who governs, moving towards more participatory practices, really embodying trust. And what really stands out is this community in terms of the places that we are most able to shed kind of the gilded philanthropy habits are these spaces where we come out of our different institutions and we come together collectively, right? Maybe that's a giving circle, maybe it's a collaborative fund. I know from my own experience that when you are doing collaborative funding, one of the things that you are able to do is have some space and distance from donor intent, right? From that powerful kind of billionaires know best. And what you're able to do is actually set up decision-making processes and tables that have people at, at the table that are not there otherwise in the sector. So it's not that like the new era is theoretical, but actually what I was looking at is what are the things that we've been planting seeds for, and where I see, like in this garden, there's a big portion of this garden of the new era that is work that's been collective. And I think, we were talking about this in the green room, that, as part of this book, I interviewed you and Sarah. And, I think that in addition to supporting the work, I feel like you all have been doing really important research and documentation of it, right? So that when I was interviewing you for the book, I think I was following kind of what I was seeing, but then I spoke with you all, and your research absolutely was affirming that there's something that's happening in this collective giving space and community that is profoundly distinct from this prior era of philanthropy. And so it made a lot of sense to kind of end the book on that, to say, like, this is what we lean into. This is how we find our strength, and how we find our bigger, to use Hallie's book title, how we find our bigger we, right? How we found our power so that we can leverage it for those who are building their power.
So important to mention, and I think something we always preach, and so many folks in this movement preach, is that collective and collaborative giving are not new, not American. This isn't something that just like budded up in the last decade. This has been going on for centuries. This is how communal care and communal caretaking is how the world has survived, literally. And so much of philanthropy, I think we've just distorted and shifted what we think that means and what it looks like. And it's only about large dollars. And so thank you for referencing the research. That's our big In Abundance report on the landscape of collective giving. I think what that shows is that there's so much out there that is really hard to research and really hard to show in numbers. It's way easier to show the top 10 givers and how much money they're flowing out, because the list is so small. As soon as you're looking at hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people likely all over the world, it becomes much harder to show, and that collective impact becomes harder to show as well, but it doesn't mean it's not worth trying. So thank you for lifting that up, and thanks to everybody here today that filled out the surveys to share your voice.
Well, I just want to say one more thing, that I've been reading Hallie's book, and I know she's going to close us out, but one of the things that struck me right away that I love is that both of us early on in our books talk about where we learned about giving. And, I say in my book, like, I never heard the word philanthropy growing up. But what I did grow up with was such a strong ethos that was modeled by my mother of a feeling of like, there's always enough when we share. Like, there's always enough when we come together and when we collectively try to make things happen. I mean, this is how, in my community, and in my family, this is how a lot of us were able to go to college. Not that any of us had the resources on our own, but that everybody, like a big portion of us, put in like $5,000 so that somebody in the family could go to college. And Hallie talks about something really similar, right? And so I think that what to me is really powerful about the Giving Circle movement, about so much of collective giving is that we are kind of digging back into a different history, right? So there's the Carnegie history that I think has brought us a lot of what I call in the book artifacts that we just don't work for us anymore, things that we should really shed and leave behind. But then I think that many of us have a different lineage, a different kind of cultural set of practices and resources that are about centering care. And we need so much more of that in philanthropy. Like that to me is new era stuff, but it's like also old. And we need to kind of reach back and bring that into our work because it creates more space for all of us, right?
Thank you for sharing. I would know everyone here on the call couldn't agree with you more. Antoinette in the chat says there's always enough when we share. Such a great message. So that is the hope, that is the possibility, that is the excitement. And we are living in a time where there's so much backlash and fear and retrenchment, and folks every day are figuring out, what can I do in this moment when it's quite difficult? And so how has it felt for you to put out this call for boldness and transformation at a time where there's also so many folks feeling like they need to, play it safe or pull back in certain ways? How are you thinking about this current moment? Help us all understand what you're seeing in your discussions and what this moment has taught you about why your message is so urgent.
It is a really difficult moment to put this out because it's a moment in parts of the sector of real retraction, of people wanting to just be really like head down and don't look at me, I'm not doing anything over here. When I titled the book A New Era, I wasn't trying to sort of declare victory and say like, oh, it's all done. What I was trying to do was point towards the fact that we've been planting seeds for a type of philanthropy that can be transformative and that can move us towards a future where we don't tend to the public good with exclusively private resources. I think that, I understand the current attacks on philanthropy through the lens of, this type of philanthropy is being attacked because it's seen as impactful. So, if this is a garden and we've planted seeds, I think they're starting to sprout, and it's a moment where there's kind of an exterminator standing off there in the distance. And, that's true. And anyone that's practicing this type of philanthropy, I think, really feels that. So it's a moment, I really see this as a moment where we have to actually choose to practice this kind of philanthropy, because it's not a default. Like the new era is not a default. It's not like we are just going to magically move towards a more just future. If there's any default to philanthropy, it actually is the gilded philanthropy. And that's kind of what I've learned through the process of writing this book, is that those norms run really, really deep in the sector. And that when we aren't consciously trying to move towards new norms, that's what we fall back into. And so I think it is really a moment for choosing. I think it's a moment for choosing together. I think for those of us who are like in the United States and have been watching, for example, the attacks on law firms or universities, the only successful way to fight back when you are being attacked is to band together, to stand for something together and stand up together. The law firms that, didn't do that, they just like gave up our due process and rule of law. The other law firms that came together and stood up, they've actually been quite successful so far. So I think that, this moment it's illuminating what I think social change and social justice leaders have been modeling for generations, which is that we find our power through connection, through standing together. And so I think that that lesson is one that is quite important for funders today.
Thank you for sharing that, Dimple. And I couldn't agree more. I think for so many large institutional efforts out there, you're right, they do fall back to the level of the Gilded Age. And for everyone here on this call, a part of the collective and collaborative giving ecosystem, it's not that. The sort of the norms that you fall back to, everyone here in this movement are all of these efforts around the new era of philanthropy. And so it just means that we all have to be that guiding light and share our stories of what we've learned, how we're trying things, what things can, how beautiful the grass can be on the other side. So I encourage everyone to really stand up tall in that way and band together. We only have a few minutes left. And so as part of our closing together, Dimple, I would love to hear from you two things. One, I think what's so powerful about collective and collaborative giving is that we all know that it's the process. It's actually in the moments, in the discussion, in that space of relationship and peer learning where the new era comes out. It's not the outcome, it's actually in the process. And what that means is that we are all actually in relationship with people. We are actually having hard conversations. We're actually interrogating how to do things better. And then on the flip side, I think we all have such big dreams. We hold a much larger vision for what the world can look like and what we're building towards. And so I'd love to hear from you 2 points. What keeps you dreaming big and what moments of hope keep you inspired? And do you have one call to action for everybody here that they can lean further into in the new era of philanthropy?
Yeah. You know, this community keeps me really hopeful because, you know, I've been in this sector for 2 decades now, and what is happening in our community here is really different. It's who is leading and where they are leading us to is really different. You know, I think you have, or I think you had this data in one of your reports, and I think Bridgespan found this, that that the leadership of collaborative funds is like 50% leaders of color, in contrast to the private foundation leadership, which is like 10% people of color. And just what that, in a lived way, what that means in terms of all the different lived experiences, all the different communities that are being brought into this philanthropy and that are shaping this type of philanthropy, that keeps me really hopeful. So I mean, I think that this is a community that is way out ahead, building the new era. And my advice is keep going, right? We're on to something, keep going. Even if it gets a little more challenging in this moment, let's lean into our community. Let's figure out how to do this together. And then, you know, my call to action is something very simple and related, which is something I have in that last chapter, which is to keep, like, throughout all of our work, keep asking, can we do this together? You know, and just to kind of watch how that simple question can just change the scope of what we do. It can change, it can move us from like a scarcity mindset to an abundance frame, right? Yeah. Right now, I see so many funders saying, this is, you know, looking at like the federal funding cuts and saying, well, private philanthropy can't step in. I only have $100 million in my foundation. How could I ever meet this need? And I think the point is not how much any one of us has. The point is all the different resources and imagination and power that we can lean into if we say that we're going to meet this moment together. right? That is something we have not fully experienced or tested. And I think we will, and I think we will find so much power and resource there when we do.
Dimple, thank you so much for this incredible conversation. I hope everyone runs out and gets a new era of philanthropy, 10 practices to transform wealth into a more just and sustainable future. And if you got the swag bag, you have this as part of that as well. So thank you for this incredible conversation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm going to turn it back to Sara.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dimple and Isis. What an incredible way to kick off We Give Summit 2025. I am feeling extremely inspired heading into the rest of the week, and I hope all of you are too. We're just getting started, so be sure to join us for more sessions over the next 2 days. And as a fun bonus, everyone who joins live in the sessions will be entered for a chance to win a $50 gift card to shop at the We Give Summit shop that is new this year. And I'm excited to announce that our first winner for this session is Sophia Kiselbash. A member of the Philanthropy Together team will follow up with you shortly. Please keep the energy going. You're going to see right now a poll. So please take a 10 seconds to fill it out, because we need your feedback. That is the way that we make things better year over year. Engage with our community on Huba. You can start right now by saying happy birthday to Muhi from the American Muslim Community Foundation. It's his 40th birthday today. Share your favorite moments on social using hashtag WeGiveSummit, and invite others to register. It's not too late to join. We have designed this summit to be a space for reflection, connection, and action. So please take full advantage of the community board, the chat rooms in the sessions, and the rich conversations happening all around you. This is your chance to tap into our shared wisdom and live with tangible ideas to bring back to your community. I mean, you saw that chat. Everybody has made great ideas. And I want to give a huge shout out and a big thank you to our sponsors, because your partnership makes this work possible. DAF Giving 360, the Minneapolis Foundation, the Gates Foundation, the Latino Community Foundation, O'Brien Family, Global Impact, Radiant Strategies, the Bold Training, Colmena Consulting, the NUN, and the Women's Giving Circle of Howard County. And a heartfelt thank you to the Fidelity Charitable Catalyst Fund for helping seed and grow giving circles across the Mountain West and Southern regions of the US. Thank you so much. And last but not least, don't worry if you miss a live session. Recordings will be available within 48 hours, and there's still so much more ahead. So speaking of momentum, let's keep going. Are you ready for the next session? Join me along with Isis, Ilyasa, and Taisha from our team, Victoria Brana and Adriana Lozon Ceballos, for a special conversation where you'll be the first to see Philanthropy Together's brand new video. And we'll reflect on the past 5 years, look ahead of what's next, and most importantly, we want to hear from you in the next session. So let's thrive together. Thank you.